The earth was burning, though not in fire. Cities still stood, oceans still surged, and forests still whispered their secrets. But the sky above had been stolen. It was no longer the deep velvet sprinkled with stars that poets once wrote about. It was a prison grid. The invaders had woven satellites and orbital fortresses into a lattice that blotted out half the heavens. When you looked up, you didn't see infinity anymore. You saw the cage. The Ketheri, the name hissed like venom among the survivors, had come not as conquerors seeking dominion, but as erasers. Their empire stretched across the spiral arms, but they did not want Earth, not really. They wanted to scrub humanity from existence, to make us a forgotten footnote, another species that dared to stand and was unmade. They erased records. They burned archives. They shattered telescopes and museums, tore apart data centers, and sent their precision craft to incinerate libraries from orbit. They weren't just destroying humans, they were deleting us. And it almost worked. In the ruined bunkers of what was once Geneva, children learned to whisper history like contraband. Once we had touched the moon. Once we had walked among the stars. But outside, the Ketheri drones scoured every signal, every flicker of memory, seeking to turn even stories to ash. Yet what they didn't understand was that humans are not just flesh. We are memory, we are myth. And even when every page is torn, stories cling to us like breath. The spark of defiance. Admiral Leona Kale stood before the remnants of what used to be Earth's defense fleet. It wasn't a fleet anymore, just 6 ships half-broken, patched with scrap, running on the faith of engineers who hadn't seen proper factories in a decade. She looked at the cracked hull of the ISS Dauntless. Its plating had been fused together with melted cargo containers. Its engine stuttered, coughing blue fire like a dying dragon. Yet it floated, stubborn against the darkness. "We aren't soldiers anymore," she said to the assembly of captains, pilots, and ground rebels who had smuggled themselves into this hidden asteroid base. "We're memory. We're proof that humanity hasn't been erased." Her voice didn't roar. It was quiet, steady, the way steel hums before it cuts. "They took our skies," she continued, "so we'll paint new ones." Confusion flickered in the eyes around her. But one engineer, Malik O'Hara, understood. He had been the architect of orbital telescopes once. Now, with his face streaked in grease and his hands shaking from malnutrition, he smiled for the first time in years. "We'll make the stars ourselves," he whispered. "This secret project, Constellation, it began as madness. The Ketheri monitored everything. Ships couldn't jump without detection. Communications were filtered through alien algorithms. But Malik had studied the lattice that covered the heavens. He discovered blind spots, gaps between the Ketheri's artificial grid, tiny seams where their surveillance couldn't reach. What if, he thought, we fill those gaps with light of our own? Not just weapons. Not just survival. A message. A defiance written across the void. Project Constellation was born. They scavenged old satellites, broken comm relays, mining drones abandoned in the belt. Piece by piece, they reassembled them not as weapons, but as luminous beacons, devices that could burn bright enough to be seen from the surface, aligned in patterns across the night. The plan was insane. Deploying them meant risking every ship they had. The Ketheri would notice. They would come. But Admiral Kale said, "They want to erase us. We'll carve our names into the stars themselves. Let them try to erase that." The whispering Earth. While the fleet prepared, Earth below held its breath. In the ruins of Mumbai, a boy named Arun traced the outlines of stars he had never seen, carved into stone by generations past. In the underground schools of Bogota, children painted constellations on the walls by candlelight, guided by the words of elders who remembered the old skies. Even as hunger clawed at bellies and drones prowled the skies, stories spread like fire in the dark. People began to hum lullabies that spoke of Orion, Cassiopeia, and the North Star. The Ketheri could silence broadcasts, they could burn books, but they could not stop the oldest transmission of all, the human voice. And so, without knowing it, billions of whispers aligned with Admiral Kale's plan. Humanity was remembering its stars. First strike, the luminous exodus. It began on the longest night of the year. 6 battered ships slipped from the asteroid base, engines masked with stolen alien codes. Each carried dozens of satellites crammed in like contraband, jury-rigged with scavenged nuclear batteries. The first deployment was clumsy. The Dauntless ejected a beacon that spun wildly, threatening to crash back into the hull. But Malik, sweating in the engineering bay, stabilized it. A spark ignited. A beam of white fire burst across the darkness, visible even to the human eye. The second beacon lit. Then the third. From Earth's surface, under ruined cities and shattered skies, people gasped. For the first time in decades, they saw new stars appear. Not the ones stolen by the Ketheri, but human-made, arranged with deliberate intent. A message written across the void. It wasn't words. Not yet. Just a pattern. A beginning. But to those on Earth, it felt like a pulse. A heartbeat in the dark. And to the Ketheri, it was an insult, a defiance louder than any fleet. The hunter awakens. The Ketheri noticed. Orbital fortresses powered up. Drones poured from hangars. Alien cruisers, sleek and cruel, descended toward the beacons. "Admiral, they're coming," said Captain Way of the Resolute. Leona Kale didn't flinch. She watched the stars burn brighter behind her. "They erased our past," she said. "Let them chase our future." The ships scattered, luring Ketheri forces into ambushes near mined asteroids, sacrificing themselves to buy minutes, seconds, anything for the satellites to align. The first human-made constellation formed in the sky above Earth that night. Not Orion, not Cassiopeia. Something new. A shape no human had seen before, but one every human understood. A figure standing tall, arms raised, as if holding up the heavens themselves. It was us, humanity, a constellation of defiance. On Earth, in the ruins of Paris, an old woman looked up and whispered through cracked lips. "They tried to erase us from the stars." Her granddaughter, clutching her hand, finished the thought as the new constellation blazed above. "But we became the stars." And so it began. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about remembrance. About making sure that no matter how many fleets burned, no matter how many archives were destroyed, humanity would live in the sky itself. The constellations had been born. The first constellation had changed everything. On Earth, people poured into streets, even under the patrol of Ketheri drones. They pointed upward, gasped, wept, and whispered prayers. For decades, the night had been nothing but a cage of alien machinery. Now above that prison, a human-made figure stood blazing, a constellation not of ancient gods, but of us. The Ketheri tried to erase it. They unleashed beams from orbital cannons, tearing through the void. They destroyed a dozen of the luminous satellites, shredding them into clouds of glitter. But Malik O'Hara's calculations had been clever. For every beacon destroyed, another shifted into place, maintaining the figure. The more the Ketheri tried to erase it, the more humanity's creation adapted, rearranging, persisting. It was as if the constellation itself refused to die. And with that light came something the aliens had not anticipated, uprising. The fire on the ground. In Lagos, rebels attacked a Ketheri supply hub, painting the burning wreckage with the shape of the same human figure they saw above. In Siberia, children etched the constellation into ice, carving it deep so it would last even when drones came to melt it down. In Santiago, an old astronomer dragged his broken telescope out of hiding, aiming it not at alien fortresses, but at the constellation, tears blurring his vision. Everywhere, across continents, the light in the sky became a signal. It whispered one truth. We are not erased. The Ketheri, who had ruled Earth through silence, suddenly faced something they could not stop. Hope. The painted fleet, birth. Admiral Leona Kale knew the first constellation was only a beginning. The Ketheri were now hunting them relentlessly. The asteroid base was compromised. The 6 ships they had were dwindling. The price of each new star was blood. And yet they did not stop. Instead, they turned desperation into design. "We will not only light constellations," Kale told her crew. "We will paint the sky." The painted fleet was born. Every ship was patched together from scavenged ruins of human industry and stolen alien scrap. The Dauntless, once crippled, now bore wings of mismatched plating like a wounded bird reforged into a predator. The Resolute carried hull scars glowing with stolen alien alloys, shimmering like veins of fire. But more than their looks, it was their mission. Each ship became a brush, carrying beacons, projectors, and luminous drones to carve images into the heavens. Malik O'Hara led the designs. The constellations are not just symbols, he explained, sketching madly across sheets of salvaged alloy. Their code, their memory. We can embed our history in them, hidden in light patterns. We'll paint humanity's story across the stars themselves. First painting, the Phoenix. The next mission launched under the shadow of pursuit. Alien cruisers prowled every corridor of space. But Kale's fleet slipped between them, using ancient asteroid mines as cover. This time, they did not form a figure. They painted a phoenix. Wings of fire spread across the void as satellites aligned, each glowing bright, weaving a bird of rebirth that soared across half the night sky. From Earth, billions watched in silence. Some recognized the myth. Some didn't. But all felt the meaning. The Ketheri burned cities. They shattered nations. They scattered humanity to the ashes. But ashes are where phoenixes are born. The painted fleet's message was simple. We rise. Alien reaction, fear in the stars. For the first time, the Ketheri faltered. Among their command ships, debates raged. Why did the humans not submit? Why, after losing so much, did they still create? Erasure should have broken them. Yet now, their stars blazed brighter than any Ketheri monument. Worse, whispers began among the other enslaved species. The Ketheri's empire stretched far beyond Earth. Countless civilizations had been crushed beneath their heel. But now, intercepted transmissions showed images of human constellations spreading across the void. And those enslaved races began to wonder, if humans could defy, why not them? The Ketheri hadn't just failed to erase humanity. They had lit rebellion across the galaxy. The painted fleet's sacrifice. The cost, however, was terrible. During the Phoenix mission, the Resolute was cornered by 3 alien destroyers. Captain Way ordered his crew to evacuate into escape pods, but he himself remained at the helm. Every painting needs sacrifice, he said, locking the controls. Let this be my brushstroke. He rammed the Resolute into the lead destroyer, igniting its core. The explosion painted the stars with fire, scattering debris that glowed like embers across the heavens. From Earth, those embers looked like sparks trailing from the Phoenix's wings. And so, Captain Way became immortal, not erased, but written into the stars. Humanity becomes the myth. By the third painting, Earth no longer whispered only in secret. Entire cities dared to chant beneath the night sky. Children pointed upward not with fear, but with pride. They did not say the Ketheri rule us. They said, look, that's us. That's our sky. The aliens had sought to erase humanity from the stars. Instead, humanity was painting its story so boldly across the void that it could never be forgotten. Not by humans, not by aliens, not by time itself. We were becoming not just survivors, not just rebels. We were becoming the myth. Closing of Part 2. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Admiral Kale stood watching the Phoenix blaze above Earth. They'll come harder next time, Malik said quietly beside her. They'll come, she agreed. But every time they do, we'll paint brighter, until even they can't look away. And below on Earth, a girl traced the Phoenix's wings into the dirt, smiling for the first time in her life. Her father whispered, "They tried to erase us from the stars." She looked up, her eyes filled with fire. But we are the stars. The painted fleet's war had only begun. The Phoenix still burned across the sky, but the Ketheri had grown furious. They no longer sent patrols and destroyers, they sent fleets. Earth's night was shattered by streaks of alien fire as orbital fortresses descended lower, casting whole continents in their shadow. The invaders understood now, this was not rebellion, it was infection. Human defiance had begun to spread. Across the Empire's enslaved worlds, secret messages in stolen frequencies showed the human constellations. The figure, the phoenix, the sparks. Slaves whispered, "If the erased can rise, so can we." The Ketheri were no longer facing a people to be erased. They were facing an idea, and ideas cannot be bombed into silence. So the aliens decided, if light gave humans power, they would drown them in darkness. The blackout. It began with the Shroud engine. From the largest of their dreadnoughts, the Ketheri released a wave of gravitic distortion. Space itself bent, swallowing radiation, suffocating starlight. Where it passed, beacons went dark, satellites flickered, and even Earth's moon seemed to dim. The painted fleet watched in horror as their constellations collapsed, erased one by one until the sky returned to black. In the bunkers of Earth, children cried. In the ruins of cities, people screamed at the heavens. Hope had been painted out. For a moment, the Ketheri had won. Malik's despair. Malik O'Hara sat in the dauntless engineering bay, surrounded by broken beacon parts. His fingers bled from working with jagged alien alloys. His eyes were hollow. "What we can't outpaint them," he whispered. "What if they truly erase us this time?" Admiral Kale placed a hand on his shoulder. "They don't understand us," she said. "They think stars are light. They think hope is brightness. But stars are born in darkness, Malik. The masterpiece comes not when light is easy, but when it is fought for." Malik blinked. His grief shifted into fury, into genius. "What if," he said slowly, "we paint with the darkness itself?" The masterpiece plan. The painted fleet had painted figures, symbols, myths in light. But now Malik proposed something no one had imagined. "We'll use their Shroud engine," he said. "We'll bend the darkness it creates, carve patterns into the void itself. Not stars that shine, but shadows that form shapes no one can erase." Kale stared at him. It was madness. To manipulate the enemy's own weapon. To paint not in light, but in the very absence of it. But madness had always been humanity's brush. The plan was set. The infiltration. To harness the Shroud engine, they needed to board the dreadnought that carried it, the Ulthar Dominion. It was the size of a small continent, bristling with weapons, guarded by a swarm of escorts. It was suicide. And yet, the painted fleet moved. The Dauntless led, engines flaring as it dove into the teeth of alien fire. The Herald and Ashen Wing followed, scattering drones and mines. The last survivors of Earth's orbital fighters screamed upward, their craft breaking apart even as they pierced the dreadnought's shields. Kale herself led the boarding assault. Armor-scorched, rifle clutched in her hands. She and her soldiers fought through metallic corridors dripping with alien machinery. Every step was death. Every corner was fire. But they pressed on. Because they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to paint the masterpiece. The darkness painted. In the Shroud chamber, Malik connected stolen human processors into the alien core. Sparks flew, his hands shaking as the Shroud engine pulsed, threatening to consume him. Kale fought beside him, holding off a tide of alien guards. And then, Malik screamed as the system obeyed. The Shroud engine pulsed once more, but this time the darkness bent to human will. From Earth, people looked upward, expecting only despair. But slowly, against the blank canvas of the void, shapes began to emerge. Not stars, not light. Silhouettes of fire-black wings. A figure rising from shadows, carved by absence itself. The masterpiece. Humanity drawn not in brightness, but in defiant void. It was a constellation of darkness standing against the cage of alien light. It was a message to the galaxy. Even if you erase our light, the shadow of us remains. The alien fear. The Ketheri command panicked. Their shroud, meant to silence humanity, had become humanity's weapon. Their empire's subjects now looked up and saw not just resistance, but permanence. The humans were no longer just survivors scratching light into space. They had mastered even the void. The Ketheri began to fear not extinction for humans, but extinction of their own authority. The sacrifice. As the masterpiece burned across the void, alarms shrieked within the dreadnought. The core was overloading. Malik knew what it meant. If the ship exploded, so would the shroud engine, and the masterpiece would vanish with it. "I can stabilize it," he said, his voice trembling. "But I can't leave." Kale's eyes widened. "No, Malik." He smiled, blood streaking his face. "Every constellation needs someone to hold the brush." And before anyone could stop him, he fused himself into the machine, his body breaking, his mind burning. But his was steady. The masterpiece held. The painted fleet escaped as the Ulthar Dominion tore itself apart in fire. And when Earth looked up, the constellation of darkness still stood, unchanging, unbreakable. Admiral Kale stood on the bridge, silent, as the masterpiece burned across the void. "We've lost Malik," whispered an officer. "No," Kale said. Her voice was steady, like steel. "We are Malik now. Every time we fight, every time we remember, he's there. In the stars, in the shadows." On Earth, children no longer feared the dark. They looked upward at the silhouette painted in void and whispered. They tried to erase us from the stars. And humanity's answer was louder than ever. "But even the darkness remembers us." The masterpiece of darkness had been born. The masterpiece of darkness had not only shaken Earth. It had echoed across the spiral arms. On distant mining worlds, slaves paused at their chains and looked upward. They could not see Earth's skies, but smuggled transmissions carried the images. The human constellation painted not in light, but in shadow. The message was clear. Humanity had made itself immortal. Even erased, it remained. And in those enslaved hearts, something long crushed began to stir. Hope. The Ketheri tried to censor it. They destroyed transmitters, executed those who whispered of constellations. But it was too late. The virus had spread. The painted fleet had ignited a galactic fire. The painted fleet's return. The dauntless limped through asteroid belts, half its hull sheared open. Only 3 ships of the painted fleet remained now. On its bridge, Admiral Kale stared at star charts filled with red, the Ketheri's patrols swarming every corridor of space. "They'll come for us harder than ever," her officer muttered. "They'll come for the masterpiece," Kale corrected. "They'll want to erase it with everything they have." Her eyes were tired, but steel remained in them. "Then let them. If they chase us, they won't see the galaxy burning behind them." Earth rises. On Earth, something impossible happened. For the first time in decades, humans dared to rise not in secret, but openly. Cities once silent with fear now rang with chants. "We are the stars." They painted constellations on walls, built bonfires in the shapes of beacons, even risked gathering in the open under alien patrol. When drones fired into crowds, people died, but they died with their fists raised toward the masterpiece in the sky. And more came the next day. The erasure had failed. Humanity was louder in death than in silence. Allies in the shadows. Then came the first signal. A transmission, weak, scrambled, almost broken. But its meaning was undeniable. "We see your stars. We remember too." It came from the Lyrini, an insectoid race the Ketheri had enslaved for millennia. Then another. The Saurin, amphibians whose oceans had been poisoned by the Empire. Then another. Then another. The galaxy's voices, long silent, now aligned themselves with humanity. The constellations had become a language of rebellion. Kale's painted fleet was no longer alone. The battle of burning sky. The Ketheri struck back with fury. They deployed a fleet of 200 ships above Earth, intent on burning both the constellations and humanity in a single blow. The night sky became a war. The painted fleet, hopelessly outnumbered, still rose to fight. Their ships were brushstrokes of fire across the void, weaving through alien formations. On Earth below, every rebel rose, every weapon fired, every stone thrown became part of the war. Civilians died in the thousands, but their chants only grew louder. The battle was chaos, yet in that chaos, Malik's masterpiece still glowed. The silhouette of humanity carved in darkness refused to vanish, even as alien cannons tore through the heavens. The turning point. The Lyrini struck first. Their hidden fleet erupted from asteroid fields, long disguised as mining platforms, firing into the Ketheri's flank. The Sauron followed, rising from oceans, where they had hidden submersible warships for centuries. And then world after world joined, some with fleets, some with sabotage, some only with whispers that weakened the Empire's grip. The Ketheri realized too late. By trying to erase humanity, they had painted its defiance across the galaxy. And now the galaxy itself had risen. The war in stars. The painted fleet did not command armies. They did not order worlds. But they gave symbols. Every battle was marked with new constellations. Above a liberated Lyrini colony, satellites formed the image of chains breaking. Above Sauron oceans, a great wave carved in light. Above every victory, a new painting written in the stars. It was no longer just war. It was art. It was myth. It was history written across the night sky. And the Ketheri, once eternal masters, found themselves painted not as gods, but as shadows, villains in the story they could not erase. Closing of Part 4. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Admiral Kale looked at the galactic map. Red markers of enemy fleets still outnumbered them 100 to 1. But now, across that map, sparks of blue glowed. Allies. Uprisings. Fires that could not be extinguished. "They'll keep coming," whispered her officer. Kale smiled faintly. "Then we'll keep painting. Until the galaxy itself is our canvas." Above Earth, a new constellation flared into being. It was not a phoenix, not a figure, not a shadow. It was a fleet, ships drawn in light, sailing eternally across the stars. The painted fleet had become immortal. The galaxy was burning. The Ketheri, cornered and desperate, unleashed everything they had. Their war machine, once endless, flawless, unquestioned, was now cracking under rebellion. But still, their fleets darkened systems, their dreadnoughts split moons, their armies marched with relentless precision. And yet, everywhere they struck, the stars betrayed them. Every battlefield bore constellations, painted by the humans and their allies. Some were light, some were shadow, some burned in patterns of fire. Each one whispered defiance, each one a reminder. The erased had returned. The Ketheri named it the Star Plague. To them, it was infestation. To the galaxy, it was freedom. And now, they would try to snuff it out in one final act, Earth itself. The fall of the painted fleet. The painted fleet had been whittled down to ghosts. The Dauntless, Kale's flagship, was cracked and bleeding fire. Only 2 other ships remained. When the Ketheri armada descended upon Earth, blotting out the heavens with thousands of warships, Kale knew the fleet could not win. "We're not here to survive," she told her crew. "We're here to finish the painting." Malak's masterpiece of darkness still glowed above Earth, but it was flickering. The beacons were failing, and soon the Ketheri would erase even that. So Kale gave her last order. "Deploy everything. Every beacon, every drone, every scrap of light we have. Don't fight to destroy them. Fight to write us into the sky." The final painting. The Dauntless and her sisters surged upward into impossible battle. Cannons roared, hulls tore apart, escape pods jettisoned. But as each ship died, it released beacons in its wake. On Earth, billions watched the sky ignite. It began as a figure, then wings, then chains breaking, then the phoenix, then the fleet. Every symbol humanity had ever painted was unleashed together, aligning across the void. And then something more. The constellations merged, light and shadow intertwined. The masterpiece expanded until it covered the sky itself. From horizon to horizon, Earth's heavens blazed with a single vast constellation. Humanity. Not a symbol, not a myth, but faces. The faces of billions, ancestors, rebels, children, woven from light and void, immortalized across the stars. The aliens had tried to erase humans from memory. Instead, humanity had painted itself into eternity. The Admiral's choice. On the bridge of the Dauntless, alarm screamed. The core was collapsing. Kale stood alone, her crew evacuated, her ship moments from destruction. She opened the comm to Earth. My name is Admiral Leonikale, she said, her voice steady, carried across every surviving frequency. If they erase me, remember me in the stars. If they erase you, fight until you are written in fire. Because this is what it means to be human. We do not vanish. We become constellations. And with that, she drove the Dauntless into the heart of the Ketheri flagship. The explosion did not destroy the constellation. It completed it. Her sacrifice became the final brushstroke. The end of the Ketheri. The Ketheri won that battle in numbers. Earth was scarred, billions dead, the fleet gone. But in truth, they had already lost. Because the constellation remained. Because the galaxy had seen. The Lyrini revolted openly, burning Ketheri cities. The Sauron drowned their masters in oceans of fire. World after world tore free of chains, guided not by orders, but by the painted stars. The Ketheri Empire, built on fear, collapsed under the weight of an idea they could not kill. Humanity eternal. Centuries passed. The war ended. Empires rose and fell. Earth rebuilt, scarred but alive. And still, above the skies, the constellation burned. Beacons replaced. Darkness reshaped. Every generation maintained it, expanded it, added new brushstrokes. Travelers from across the galaxy came to see it, not just as art, but as scripture. Children pointed upward, not only on Earth, but on Lyrini colonies, Sauron oceans, even alien worlds humanity had never touched, and whispered the same words. They tried to erase us from the stars. And the answer echoed across time, across galaxies, across eternity. But we became the constellations.